Hi guys, I'm Sally with OwlCrate Jr. and I'm here today to bring you my very favorite books from childhood. I went over to my parents' house and mined their bookshelves to find all the books that I read and reread over and over again when I was age 8 to 12. So I wanted to share them with you. I do want to start by saying this is not a diverse list of books. A lot of them are classics, so they were written sort of turn of the century to the 30s, or even up until the 90s. So this is, it's a white bunch of kids. As a response to that, I will be doing another video in the not too distant future, all about the books that I wish had existed when I was a kid, ones that I still haven't read and should have. So I will be sharing a much more diverse group of books with you soon. But for today, let's look through my childhood. So the selections in this video are a total mixed bag and they are in no particular order, so let's just get going. First up on my list is Nancy Drew. This is one of literally hundreds I read as a kid. This series began in the 1930s as the girl version of the Hardy Boys. They're all written under the pseudonym Carolyn Keene. They couldn't be more formulaic and I just loved them. Nancy is a 16-year-old sleuth. She goes on her adventures with her cousin George, who I loved because she also had a boy name. My middle name is Michael. And her sort of nervous friend Bess, and the three of them just solve mysteries. This one is all about Nancy receives a letter that is meant to go to an heiress in England who is also named Nancy Drew, and it's a case of mistaken identity. And they're just so fun, and they give you the chance to actually solve the mystery along with her because they do sort of parcel out the clues. They're just super fun. The next on my list is Matilda by Roald Dahl. I really could have gone with any Roald Dahl for this pick because I have pretty much all of his children's books. But I had to go with Matilda because she is just one of my favorite middle grade characters of all time. For anybody who hasn't read the book, Matilda, we meet when she's about 5.5. She's just whip smart, has read every book that she can get her hands on, but her parents and her family are just miserable, self-centered, bad people. And it always seemed so unfair that she got plunked down into this family. Anyways, she's smart and she's funny and she has a little streak of magic that sort of comes out halfway through the book out of nowhere. But I always loved her because as patient and as kind as she is, she's also got a real mischievous streak and she's not above seeking out revenge on people. And in true Roald Dahl form, it's all very dark humor, and it's got the Quentin Blake illustrations, which are just part and parcel with all of Roald Dahl's books. The next on my list is The Sky is Falling by Kit Pearson. This is one that I think may have been part of the curriculum in Canada, but as far as I know, it's not as well known outside of Canada. This is the first in a trilogy called The Guests of War, and it's all about Nora and her little brother Gavin, who in 1940 are sent from England to Toronto to escape the bombing. So they are sent to live away from their parents. They've never met the family that they are now living with. Nora does not get along with the head of the household, and it's just this really lovely historical fiction account of World War II and the children who were involved with it. I think I read these books, especially the first two, which are both from Nora's point of view, just so many times when I was a kid. Yeah, I love them. I really recommend them. The next on my list is Charlotte's Web by E.B. White. This is just an absolute children's classic. It stands the test of time. I love it. It is a brilliant read aloud as well as a solo read. And if you're like me, then you will have it read to you several times. I think I had teachers read this to me and my mom read this to me, and I read it to myself as well. It's just fantastic. It's all about Wilbur, this little pig here, who is rescued by Fern when he is going to go to slaughter. Fern freaks out and her dad lets her adopt this little piglet. And then when he gets a little bit too big to be living in the house, he goes to live in the barn where he meets Charlotte. Charlotte is this wise, wonderful character who starts weaving messages into her webs to basically turn Wilbur into like a celebrity or like a divine figure to continue rescuing him from a fate of going to slaughter. The book is just full of funny characters. There's a lazy rat named Templeton, this funny goose. It's just fantastic. It's one of the best animal stories I have ever read, and it's also just full of like really beautiful, wise philosophy, I think. So definitely pick this one up. I don't know if all of the copies still have the original illustrations, but Garth Williams illustrated this one, and he also did all of the illustrations for the Little House on the Prairie series. So just a nice little bonus in there. And next on my list is A Little Princess by Frances Hodgson Burnett. This is the story of 10-year-old Sarah, who her father treats her like a princess, but he has to go away for work, so he leaves her at a like elite boarding school, and then he dies while he's away, and she is suddenly, it's a riches to rags story. The horrible headmistress decides that she can stay at the school, but she has to live in the attic and be a servant. I remember reading this when I was about 10 years old, which is how old Sarah is in this book, and just being so outraged for her at the terrible treatment that she was being put through, and being so proud of her for how strong she remained, and how she would stand up for herself against all the unjust things that were going on around her. The story has a happy ending, which I actually don't remember the details of, so I definitely need to give this one a reread, but just a really beautiful classic story. Next is another one that was turned into a movie, but this movie I absolutely love. That is The Sheep Pig by Dick King-Smith, that everybody else knows as Babe. So The Sheep Pig is the story of Babe, who is a little piglet who is taken under the wing of a sheepdog named Fly, who raises him as her own and teaches him to herd sheep. It's so funny. This one is personified animals, which I think Dick King-Smith did better than almost anybody I know. It's sweet, it's funny, it's an absolutely wonderful read aloud. If you've seen the movie Babe and you absolutely love it, I highly recommend going to the source material on it. Next up, we have another Canadian series. This one is the Stevie Diamond Mystery series by Linda Bailey. The first one is How Come the Best Clothes Are Always in the Garbage. I have a feeling that these books are actually out of print now, which makes me so sad, but I know that there are lots of used copies out there, and I'm sure you could probably find them at your local library as well. But they are all about Stevie Diamond, who is just this funny, nosy, only child living in Vancouver, BC, which is where we are living. And she, much like Nancy Drew, but in a much nosier way, goes and finds mysteries and solves them, whether people want her to or not. So when we first meet Stevie in the first book, she's 11 years old, and a large sum of money has been taken right out of her family's kitchen. And despite the fact that she's told to just mind her own business, she takes it upon herself to solve this mystery herself. And surprise, she does, better than all of the adults in the story. At 11 years old, I could very much relate to Stevie, who lived in Vancouver and had crazy wild red hair that she didn't know how to deal with and was constantly being told to mind her own business. So they're funny. Her friend Jessie, who lives just a couple blocks away in her co-op housing, is a great character as well. And yeah, they're funny, modern mysteries. The next one on my list is a bit of a wild card, and that is Sweet Valley Twins, and Sweet Valley High, and Sweet Valley University, and as many versions of this as I could possibly get my hands on. My sister and I read so many of these garbage books, but we just literally took stacks of them out from the library and would just devour them. The Sweet Valley Twins are Elizabeth and Jessica Wakefield, beautiful blonde California twins who go off on all kinds of adventures. Elizabeth is the smart, modest one. Jessica is your stereotypical queen bee popular girl. In this one, they go on a trip to Paris and get in all kinds of trouble. Again, Francine Pascal, obviously a pseudonym. There are hundreds of these. The reason I included this is because I know that a lot of parents out there sometimes worry that their kids are reading just like garbage, for lack of a better word. Formulaic, not necessarily well written, certainly not like classics in the traditional form, but they're reading. And I read these. I read Nancy Drew. I read The Babysitter's Club, who, side note, much better role models than the Wakefield twins. They were like entrepreneurial, responsible young girls. But, you know, I now read for a living, and I still love it just as much as I did when I was a kid. So whether they're reading garbage or they're reading classics, they're reading, and that's the important thing. So don't stress out too much if they go through a phase where it's all one thing. Next on my list is All of a Kind Family by Sydney Taylor. This is the first of 5 books. They all take place in the Lower East Side of New York City at the turn of the century. And it's just the story of 5 young sisters. I think they range from about 5 to 16-ish, and their parents. And it's just this big Jewish family living in New York. I couldn't get enough of them as a kid. It's such like a loving family, and it's so quaint. And also it was really neat. Like, it was the first time I'd ever heard of what a Seder was and all the traditions and things that go along with Jewish tradition and Jewish holidays. I just loved them. From what I remember, each of the chapters is sort of its own little story. It's like a little snapshot into their life rather than it being one continuous arc throughout the whole book, but just really sweet. They probably seem old-fashioned now. They seemed old-fashioned in the 90s when I was reading them, but I still just absolutely loved them. They're very much just like day-in-the-life kind of snapshots. One is about they all go to the library and meet the lovely librarian that lives there that I'm pretty sure they set up with their uncle later on. There's another one where, you know, Mama is getting them to do their chores and she's like hidden little buttons and turned dusting into a game. It's just, it couldn't be more quaint. Just lovely. Next on my list is The Wonderful Wizard of Oz by L. Frank Baum. This is the first of, I believe, 14 books in this series. So if you have read this one and wanted more, or just can't get enough of long fantasy series, this is the one for you. So The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, the first one in the series, is the source material for the movie that we all know so well with Judy Garland and Technicolor amazingness. The movie actually is quite faithful in a lot of ways, but there is, as always, more in the book. More of the world, more characters, other scenes that were left out of the movie. So the first book in the series was published in 1900, so some of the language might feel a little bit outdated, but for the most part, it's just so rich with detail and imagination that it doesn't matter. You get lost in the world. And if you can find a copy that has all of the original illustrations, I love that they're like the plate illustrations. Just so neat. And the last one on my list is Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. This was published in 1997, as you all know, but I didn't actually start reading them until like 1999, 2000. This is really the last middle grade book that I read in a long time before I started working in the publishing world again. So it seems like a good place to cap my recommendations. J.K. Rowling just sort of like opened the doors for middle grade in so many ways, so I think we have a lot to thank her for the quality of the writing and the care that goes into middle grade writing. I finally broke down and bought my very own copies, so I now have this lovely edition of the first 3 books at home, and I'm slowly adding to the rest of my collection. So those are my favorite middle grade books from my own childhood that I actually owned. I was a library kid, so a lot of my other favorite books were not ones that I had immediate access to read whenever I wanted. But I feel like that's a pretty good start of where my love of reading grew. As I said at the beginning of this video, I'm going to be doing a follow-up with a bunch of books that I wish had existed when I was a kid that show off a way more diverse cast of characters. So if you have books that you think should definitely be included in my diverse middle grade TBR, please, please, please leave a comment below. If you like this video, give it a big thumbs up and subscribe for more bookish videos every Wednesday and Saturday. Happy reading, and thanks for being awesome. Bye!